Hey everybody, welcome to Influencer Week 3. I am constantly surprised by the impact of influence in ways that we could never expect. When we care about being influencers that make a difference, we make decisions that we sometimes otherwise wouldn't, and the impact is something that we could never expect. Like the time I gave away my favorite pair of shoes. It was several years ago on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I was running errands with my son Jonah, and after an uneventful trip inside our local Publix grocery store, we were standing under a covered sidewalk getting ready to make that mad dash in the rain to the car. You know the one I'm talking about because you've made that same mad dash to your car at some point. It's at that moment that we look up and see a man who was walking in the rain and he didn't have any shoes. I could tell that the man had fallen on some difficult times, and something compelled me to call after him. So I shouted, "Hey man, what happened to your shoes?" I know, probably not the best thing to shout in the moment, but he turned and ran over to the covered sidewalk next to us, and he told us his story. He told us that after a series of difficult situations, he'd lost his house and car and job. He told us that things were finally turning around and he just started a new job. And in the next couple of days, he'd be moving into a new apartment. But while he was asleep the night before in a local park, someone had stolen his shoes. He was afraid he was going to lose his job if he didn't have any shoes. I asked him what his shoe size was, and when he told me, I bet you would never guess, but it's the exact same size as mine. Guys, I would love to say, and in that moment, immediately I took off my shoes. But if I'm honest, I hesitated. They were my favorite pair of shoes. I loved the way they fit. I loved walking in them. But what made the difference was when I looked down at my son. As a father, I wanted, and still want, my children to be kind and selfless. I want to influence them to love other people so that they can influence other people. So right there on the sidewalk on that rainy Saturday afternoon, I took off my favorite pair of shoes and handed them to a man who couldn't believe what was happening. I said to him, "Hey, we're the exact same size and I've got several pairs of shoes at home." As I walked back to my car barefoot in the rain, Jonah asked me why I gave my shoes away. I told him it's because God had blessed us and gave us opportunity to change someone else's day. Exchanging shoes was also, I know this may surprise you, but a custom in ancient Israel. It was a way of showing an agreement. After a deal was reached between two people, one would take off one of his sandals and give it to the other person to show anyone witnessing that the deal was done. One of these situations of giving a shoe in exchange happens in the book of Ruth. The book tells the story of the family of Elimelech. Elimelech's wife was named Naomi, and they had two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. We don't know how, but at some point Elimelech dies, and Naomi is left with her two sons, each of whom finds a wife and gets married. But after being married only a short time, Mahlon and Chilion both die. And after one of her daughter-in-laws returns home to her parents' family, Naomi is left with just one family member, a young daughter-in-law named Ruth. Ruth had lost her husband. She wasn't even from Israel, and she found herself a young widow with no children in a foreign land. I'm sure at some point it had to have seemed hopeless. But think about Naomi just for a minute. Think about how she must have felt. She had lost everything. Her husband had died. Her sons had died. Her hope and promise of grandchildren and future generations seemed to be gone. The Bible shows us just a little bit of Naomi's pain in Ruth chapter 1, verses 20 and 21. Naomi says, "Don't call me Naomi." She responded, "Instead, call me Mara," which means bitter. "For the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me?" Naomi is hurt, and she's mad at God. You see, there's a law in Israel, though, that offers a little bit of hope to the situation. When a family seems lost or broken, there's just a chance. When a husband would die and his household and family had no one to care for it, and everything seemed lost, a relative of the husband could become a family redeemer. Elimelech had a relative, perhaps a cousin or a nephew, whose name was Boaz. And one day, while picking up scraps of wheat in Boaz's field, Ruth is noticed by Boaz. Chapter 2, verse 5 tells us, "Then Boaz asked his foreman, 'Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?' And the foreman replied, 'She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi.' Boaz begins to show Ruth kindness, giving her extra protection and portions of grain. And when Ruth tells Naomi about what happened with Boaz, Naomi sees the hope, maybe for the first time in a long time. Verse 20 says, 'May the Lord bless him,' Naomi told her daughter-in-law. 'He is showing his kindness to us, as well as to your dead husband. That man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers.'" Boaz and Ruth continue to show affection for one another. If you are into romantic movies, Ruth chapter 3 may be the part where the soft music is playing and the two main characters fall in love through the long walk on the beach or over a candlelit dinner. Boaz agrees to marry Ruth and be the family redeemer. But you see, there's a problem. Someone else has the right to be the family redeemer before Boaz. And in chapter 4, we see what Boaz does and where a shoe is exchanged. Verse 1 says, "And Boaz went to the town gate and took a seat there. Just then the family redeemer he had mentioned came by, and so Boaz called out to him, 'Come over here and sit down, friend. I want to talk to you.' So they sat down together. Then Boaz called 10 leaders from the town and asked them to sit as witnesses. And Boaz said to the redeemer, 'You know Naomi, who came back from Moab. She is selling the land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should speak to you about it so that you can redeem it if you wish. If you want the land, then buy it, here in the presence of these witnesses. But if you don't want it, let me know right away, because I am next in line to redeem it after you.' The man replied, 'All right, I'll redeem it.' Then Boaz told him, 'Of course, your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth, the Moabite widow. That way she can have children who will carry on her husband's name and keep the land in the family.' 'Well, then I can't redeem it,' the family redeemer replied, 'because this might endanger my own estates.' Then he told Boaz, 'You redeem the land, I cannot.' Verse 8 tells us that it is when the other family member took off his sandal and gave it to Boaz in front of the witnesses, that is when the deal is done. Then Boaz said to the elders and the crowd standing around, 'You are the witnesses that today I have bought from Naomi all of the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. And with the land I have acquired Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahlon, to be my wife. This way she can have a son to carry on the family name of her dead husband and to inherit the family property here in his hometown. You are all witnesses today.' Boaz and Ruth would get married, and then they would have a baby. And that baby's name was Obed. And the Bible tells us that when Obed was born, Naomi cuddled him and cared for him as if he were her own. Obed would grow to have a son named Jesse, and Jesse would have several sons. But the youngest of Jesse's sons was a shepherd boy named David, who had defeated a giant and become one of the greatest kings Israel had ever known. You see, Boaz used his influence to change Ruth and Naomi's life. The impact of Boaz's influence redeemed not just Ruth and Naomi, though, but also all of Elimelech's family. His influence made a generational difference. I took off my shoes to make a small difference to someone who needed shoes. You know, probably didn't change that man's life, but I bet it changed his day. When we use our influence to make a difference in someone else's day, we may have the opportunity to change someone's life for the better, even if it's just for a short amount of time. But we also may never know how our influence can make an impact that is greater than the moment. Boaz had no idea that his great-grandson would be the king of all of Israel. And I guarantee you, he had no idea that the Messiah himself would come from his lineage. We should look for opportunities every day to influence others to make a difference, in big ways and in smalls, because we don't know how God could use us to make those significant impacts that we're never going to see. Hey, take a few minutes today in your group to discuss influence and how you can make a difference that can have small effect or a large effect. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and I look forward to seeing you guys again next week.